So welcome everyone. I'm excited to see the folks who are introducing themselves in the chat, letting us know where you're coming from and why you came to this workshop. I would love for this to be interactive, so feel free to use as much of the chat as you would like so that we can make sure that we're answering your questions and understanding your reflections and awareness that these concepts and conversations are bringing to you. I want to make this as interactive as possible so that we stay engaged and actually make the learning real for all of us. And also at the end, I'll have a challenge, like thinking about what would you change? What are some of the things you would like to implement based on what you learned today? So I'm excited to talk with you about change and the human side of change so that we can really think about how do we make our initiatives more successful. And those initiatives can be personal or professional. So I see that in the chat, there are some folks who are doing more research-based things around behavior change. And also we may have other projects in mind. So would love to hear how these concepts influence you. So I see in the chat, some of you have mentioned what brought you here today. Would love some more thoughts if anyone has them around why they're coming. So I've seen, so Abigail mentioned that behavior change in clinical trials delivery to make them more environmentally sustainable. Again, really thinking about not only having a change that happens once, but how does it actually shift the behaviors that we are continuing to have? Often we do a change and then folks go right back to where they were. So what makes them sustainable? What is something that allows for it to continue to flow in that space that we're trying to create? Carla mentioned that she's currently a trainer. And so I love that. I love that folks will look at the content of the workshop, but also the process of the workshop. It's also important to think about, and I would love your thoughts around things that are valuable for you and what you're getting out of this. Paul initiates change, and so great. I would love your thoughts there too. Exciting that you initiate change and want to get more effective. I totally wholeheartedly support continuous learning. There are always new ways to think about things, ways to word them, ways to approach them. We're in such a changing environment. And so thinking about how we ourselves respond to change can also be a helpful influence on the way we respond to others. Excellent. And I see some other folks are typing, so would love to see that. Oh, someone's moving to Harley Quinn is moving to a new role in the same company. So then how do you transition that, right? And create minimal friction. Love that. And open the door to friction is not a negative. That we sometimes think of it that friction can be a negative, and we think that it's opposing ideas. So we'd love for us to think about how we reframe that a little bit and see the values that can be created and the joy of allowing that space for the humanity of people in our work. So love that. Thank you for saying so, Harley. And again, some more things. Enable change in a new process and revamp tools with a new approach. Great. Awesome. So continue to use the chat. We will, yes, the presentation will be shared afterwards, Amber. Excellent. Great. Yeah, so Annette's mentioning that without considering the people side of change, we do see struggles in adoption and benefits. 100%. And so this presentation and this conversation that we're having, even though some of it's virtual, the text in chat is meant to help us consider that element for sure. And then Pradeep is mentioning that they are taking up a new department and a new role. So thinking about becoming employees and just being colleagues. Yeah, this is going to be a transition that is a tough one and worth investigating and investing time. Excellent. Love the reasons everyone's here. I feel like we are in sync and ready to go. So how do we handle change? What are some of the things that happen to us as people in navigating change? I have two different models that I want to present to you so that you have a different awareness. But first, an exercise. What I'd love for you to do right now is to change 3 things about your work environment right now. Give you a moment to change 3 things. You can change your appearance, you can move things around. 3 things that you're going to change. You don't have to tell me, but change 3 things. Give you a moment to do that. And Gavin, yes, I 100% agree that when you're working as a project manager in technical projects, we cannot forget about the people. When I work with my clients, that is the biggest challenge. Is it's so easy to focus just on the technical components of things and miss that there's a people aspect to it. And this is why we see so many technology projects fail or not be fully adopted and we don't get the full value. It's because we missed the people side and that we did not engage them early enough for them to want to support the change. So Gavin, you're in the right place. I love it, love it, love it. So did you change the 3 things? How did it feel? In the chat, let me know. How does it feel to have 3 things moved in your environment that you chose to move, mind you? What does it feel like? In the chat, let's know. Let's hear what that feels like. What did that bring for you? I see some folks typing in the chat. Love it. It feels more ergonomic. Oh, okay. So you made an improvement there. Great. What else? What else is coming up for folks in changing things? New perspectives, more light and cool, cleaner, different, refreshing. Okay. Any others? Any others? What other changes did you make? Did anyone change like their jewelry? I know for me, I even showed you the change and then put it right back. Any other thoughts? Okay. So with change, even if it's self-inflicted, we just made a change to ourselves. I noticed that many folks were very positive about the change, but not often. Often folks, even with a positive change, have a different reaction. Did anyone have some challenges around how they felt about what to change? Did anyone have trouble figuring out what to change? When I asked for 3 things, did 3 things seem like a lot? Or was it easy? Let me know in the chat. Some other thoughts are they initially focus on what they have to give up. Sometimes we move from being able to think about the change to, oh no, what about the thing I like, right? Sometimes folks feel alone. Did anyone else realize that there were another 20 people on the call who are also going through this change, trying to figure out what else to do? The other piece is how many of you, I see some folks who already, told me about the change. How many of you already move things back? I didn't actually say to move things back, but how many of you automatically, after making the change, move things back? I did the same thing, right? I changed my ring and I moved it, and it does not feel comfortable on this finger. This is not the hand. This is not the finger this ring goes on. So my immediate response was, instead of trying to get used to the new location, this new place that could have lots of very valid reasons why it should go here instead of here, I immediately moved it back to where I felt comfortable. And that's often what we do, right? So when you take the pressure off, people will revert back to their old behavior. Thank you, Annette, for saying the first one was easy, the other 2 are harder, right? So we can only take so much change. Often we limit or can only do so much, right? And then people are at different levels of readiness. Some of you were ready to even tell me about the changes. Many of you didn't even write in, right? And so that's also part of it, is not really having that comfort level to share about that change. And so these 7 dynamics are rather consistent around change. And if we think about the human side of change, these are things that we want to be aware of, not only for ourselves and giving ourselves time to navigate, become more comfortable with the change, but also for those we are leading. How do we give them space to do this and not take it personally? Because these are just the way folks will operate. Any thoughts on this? Any of these are surprises? Any of these are confirmations of what you know. What are your thoughts around these dynamics of change? Confirmation. Great. Thank you. Yeah. So a lot of these are things we do know about change, and it's great. And again, sometimes we know it until it happens in real time and we're trying to get our work done or trying to get someone to do something differently or even working on ourselves on our own personal projects. We don't always give ourselves the space to be uncomfortable with the shift, even if it's a great shift, even if it's a great shift. The other way that I like to look at change is another model. So the seven dynamics are really helpful in the initial places and just the general context. But there's also a process that we follow, we tend to follow as human beings in navigating any change. And it's akin to the grief process. This is a model that was created by Kubler-Ross many moons ago. And we do find that that often folks will follow this process. James in the chat is saying that those initial seven dynamics of change are relevant, right? And they happen when we implement change. Yes, having positive communication can help. And it doesn't avoid, we don't get to avoid it, right? What we want to do, and I love that you're saying like being very proactive, right? If we know this is how folks will operate, how do we proactively support their transition through the process instead of fighting it, right? And that's what makes this human side of change so powerful. It makes it so powerful because we are not fighting against the current. We're not fighting against human nature. We're allowing for that to flow and using it as part of our transition and not making it a bad thing. So with Kubler-Ross, this change model, sometimes you may see this change model as a linear or even just a curve that flows. I like this model that shows that they're intertwined and that we can go back and forth between them. But often what we'll see is these stages of change. We can start off, and I often use the example of going to the supermarket. When I go to the supermarket, often when I walk in, and it could be after a busy day, I want to grab something. Very often they change where things are in the supermarket. I don't know if it's like that in your part of the world, but in my part of the world, they often change where things are in the supermarket. They will change the aisles. They will change the locations on the racks. They will move things around. And even for the smallest change, I will have a reaction. And it's very common. This change model is very common that we initially start with denial. Like, I can't believe they've done this again. Is this really happening? Is this happening again? Like, I can't believe they're really doing this. I once did a workshop with one of our local supermarket companies, and they apologized. Like the man who was there, he apologized. He said, "I'm so sorry. We just have, it's part of our process. Is what we do." So they are acknowledging that it does make an impact. And they're doing it for very, very valid reasons, right? They're doing it to increase sales, to create more of a dynamic interaction and more presence for us in the supermarket. I get it. And it can be frustrating. So in the denial stage, I can't believe this is happening. There's a bit of shock again. Then sometimes anger, right? And all of these can happen in different frequencies, different volumes, right? I may have anger that may be little because, okay, it's just a supermarket, it's just my shopping. Or it could be like a frustration that has built over time where it becomes bigger, or it's on top of a day when I just don't have the bandwidth to handle one more thing. That anger stage can be at different levels. But there is a bit of anger or frustration about the fact that this is happening. I've got to deal with this and I have to address it, right? And so allowing, again, for this to flow from there, move into bargaining. Okay, where else can I find this item? Does it make sense where it might be? Or do I have to ask for some help to find it? How do I do that? There could be some depression or sadness around like the fact that I'm wasting time or using time in a way that I hadn't planned. And allowing for that to flow, and then finally coming into acceptance. Often you'll see bargaining and depression switched But again, this is not meant to be a linear process. We bounce between the stages. If we are dealing with a much larger change, whether it is a transition from a job or a relationship or a financial hardship, this process can take longer. And we will bounce between those. I know in some of my stages, I went through depression and bargaining for a really long time before I moved into acceptance. And again, being aware of the fact that I am in the process, being aware of the fact that others may be in the process can help with naming those stages, understanding what they might need to be able to move forward, giving that energy and attention to be a safe space for yourself or others is a really powerful way to navigate that and really have conversations that are much more meaningful. Um, yeah, so Amber's asking, is the Kubler-Ross same as the old-fashioned grief model? It is based on the grief model, yes. And in any change, there is a grief. There is a transition of a loss of something, even if it's a great transition. I've had folks who get married and they have this wonderful, new romance and this new life that they're creating, but they are also letting go of their old life. So there is a loss in that, and it is based on that old-fashioned grief model. Kubler-Ross did the grief model as well. So yes, it is based on that. And that's why I show two different models. I show the dynamics of change and this change model so that you have different perspectives of what might be going on and some different language for sure. And then I think it's James. Yeah, James mentioned that they use the change curve to support and hold people focused in workshops. Yeah, it's a good way to communicate for sure. And so this model is also something that can be very, very helpful in being aware of and recognizing that even if let's say I'm in the bargaining or the depression stage, it's still progress. I'm no longer in denial or anger, for example. I'm not at the beginning stages of the process. I am moving along. And even though it may be, quote unquote, a negative feeling to feel anger or to feel like I need to bargain or adjust, it is also progress along the path. And that can offer a space for us to be kinder to ourselves and to others in that we are moving forward. That is part of this work, is to have that acknowledgement of, again, our own humanity. And so, yes, so thank you for the questions and conversation. So what are some of the pitfalls that you fall into when you're trying to manage change? What are some of the things that these models, whether it's the 7 dynamics of change or the change model, the Kubler-Ross change model, that might be helpful in shifting your approach to navigating change? Would love to see some thoughts in the chat. We've got 24 online. So we'd love to see some more thoughts as you're engaging in this consideration around what does change mean to you? How does it help to know that there are models that exist? And how are these models helpful? So delay as much as possible. Carla, can you say a little bit more about what that means? Delay as much as possible and then dig head first until I finish. I'm not sure what delays you're talking about. Yeah. Yeah, these are, thank you, Carla. Yes, try not to accept it. So understanding that that's part of our initial reaction to change sometimes, even for, again, a quote unquote good change, there is that hesitation. And so being able to recognize that that's our initial reaction and naming it. Is it, is it surprise? Is it that shock? Is it anger? Like, what are those things? And if we can identify what those are for ourselves, again, it helps us move through a process. Because if we just stay in shock, if we just stay in anger, if we just, right, we miss out on allowing ourselves to go fully through the process, even if it's for a silly change like the grocery store changing where my stuff is. Yes, Sarah, thank you for that. A pitfall is making assumptions about how different stakeholders will react to change. Yes, so being able to prepare but not predict. Love that, Sarah. Like that's exactly what we want to be able to do is have an awareness. These are all tools. Like none of this has to be right. No one is going to follow an exact prescribed process. Even that change process, right? That had swirls in it. None of it is prescriptive. And that is part of what makes us great leaders is that not only are we prepared with models, methodologies, approaches, strategy, we are also prepared to be present to what is and not just react, we can respond. And so if someone does have a response, a reaction to something that we say, how are we present to that enough to be effective in addressing it? Yes, yes. Megan's mentioning a pitfall trying to avoid change rather than accepting and embracing it and focusing on the negatives rather than the potential opportunities that change may bring. Yes. And we're going to get into a little bit more of a diagnostic model that will help with that as well. Awesome. And Annette's mentioning not assuming that everyone's at the same stage at the same time. That is super powerful. That we will have folks who are at all different stages and being present to what is, knowing that we have this information as a guide to the questions and curiosity we have is going to be huge. Excellent, excellent. So as we move from understanding change to actually leading change, we're already pointing to many of the areas that will be helpful. And one of these, there's a quote that I love from Socrates, and this is one of the guiding principles I use when I think about change, right? The secret of change is to focus all of our energy, not in fighting the old, but in building the new. And not fighting the old means allowing ourselves to let go and process whatever emotions and feelings we have about the changes, and then move into our vision for the future. And we can guide our folks to do that. So one of the things that I like to focus on as we think about focusing on the future, focus, is an old time management model. Franklin Covey is an organization that used many, many models over the years around how to prioritize our attention and our actions. And the way that they framed it is something that I find super useful, is that we have what's called a whirlwind. It's the thing that keeps you busy. Has anyone had the experience of having a super busy day? And at the end of the day, you were moving. You were not stagnant. You were not just sitting on the couch doing nothing, but you were active. But at the end of the day, you felt like nothing got accomplished, that nothing was done. That's living in the whirlwind. That is where you're doing things that are important and urgent and things that you have to do, but not necessarily moving the needle. You're not progressing in the direction you want fully. You may be keeping things at bay. You may be maintaining the status quo, but that's the whirlwind. It's just going to suck up all of your time if we let it. And then there are goals. These are things that are important or longer term strategic initiatives that we may have that we would like to see progress. And what we want to do is be able to find a way to marry the two. We cannot avoid the whirlwind. The whirlwind is regular life. We all have things we must do. We have to eat. We have to sleep. We have to respond to messages and emails and calls and attention that's needed from our family members and our friends and our life and our coworkers, right? We can't avoid the whirlwind. And our goal is to make sure that we carve out time for those things that are super important to us. And those are those goals or activities that are really important. So how do we do that? Well, one of the studies that is super important and helpful in thinking about how we make sure that all of the things that matter happen is to consider the number of goals or initiatives that we are working on that are strategic, that do require time, attention, energy, and focus. And there is something to be said for the number of goals we have. And again, these are not just everyday things. These are strategic initiatives that take attention and focus to happen. It could be things like implementing a new software. That doesn't happen overnight, right? If you're implementing something that's going to change behaviors and change actions, that requires a different set of energy and attention. You mentioned project management. Many of us are project managers. It could be something personal, whether it's a new workout routine or a new health regimen. Those things are not going to just magically appear in our lives without the proper planning and attention and constant reinforcement until it becomes regular life. And so, in addition to the whirlwind, the number of goals matters. If we have 2 to 3 goals, we have at least a 67% chance of achieving them, right? If we have 2 to 3 goals, the goals that get achieved could be 2 out of the 3 or 2 out of the 2, or 3. So we have 67 to 100% chance of achieving those goals. If we add just one more, we go to 4, we get at most half. So going from 67% as the least to 50% as the most that we could achieve in goals. So from 4 to 10 goals, we might get 1 to 2. And if we've got anything more than 10, we get nothing. This is one of those ideas that if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And anytime you get more than 10, honestly, if you get anything more than probably 4, you're in a situation where that everything's important and so nothing is. So the goal is to identify those key 2 or 3 goals that we would like to see implemented. And folks mentioned sustainable implementation, right? Sustainable improvements, things that we can integrate into our normal workflows, our normal daily lives. Once we've implemented those 2 to 3 things, what happens? They become part of the whirlwind. And then we have space for the next 2 to 3. And so that's part of what we want to be able to do to really see that progress. And we elevate by completing things. We don't elevate by having 20 things on our plate that are important that never get addressed because we are trying to balance that along with the whirlwind. We elevate by consistently delivering on 2 to 3 things that are important, take time and effort to integrate into our lives, into our workflows, into our daily activities. They become part of the whirlwind, and then we can move forward. So when we think about this, how do we choose? How do we choose what those 2 to 3 things are that we want to spend our time on? Well, I have a methodology. There are lots of methodologies out there on prioritization. This is only one of them. I appreciate it because I like to think about impact as my priority. There are others that folks can use what works for you. If you have an organization that uses a different style, use that. You get to choose how you prioritize. I like 2x2 matrices. I do. And I like the idea of being able to bucket things. And so what I've done with some of my teams is we've listed out all of our activities, all of our priorities, and actually gave them scores. We gave them scores on the amount of effort that it took to do them. You can quantify it in whichever way makes sense. We did ratings. We've done hours of effort. We've played with lots of different things. You decide what works for you. And then impact is along the x-axis, along that bottom row there. So increasing impact, increasing effort. And in that, we have the ability to start identifying what are those things that fit into the different categories and how much of my effort and my daily time am I spending in those? And so I invite you to consider that. I invite you to list out and think about what are some of those things that you have on your list? Where do they fit in these categories? And how much time are you spending in each of those buckets? So as you think about that, let me explain the buckets a little bit more. If we talk about the top left, the kind of mustardy color, yellowish color, low impact and high effort. These are things that tend to be more bureaucratic in nature, lots of paperwork, lots of extra steps that take a lot of time and effort, but may not actually help us move things forward. Our goal there is to avoid those as much as possible. And if you can't avoid them, because sometimes there are compliance requirements, it's a hurdle that we must meet. do our best to minimize the amount of time they take. These could actually become some of your strategic projects. I've done that many times where you say, okay, this thing is taking us way too long to do, and we have to do it. How do we make sure that it's as efficient as possible so that we are getting the goal met, but we are not utilizing critical resources to maintain that? How do we do that? And so that's a question we can ask. If you think, can anyone think of examples of things in their lives that are low impact? They're not getting the value they want out of it, but they take a lot of effort. Does anyone have any examples of that in their own work or personal lives? See some folks typing. So while you're typing, one example was I would put a lot of effort into creating presentations and dialogues for my management team, and inevitably they would change it. They would make changes, and then I'd have to put effort in again to make sure that it met all the criteria. And so instead of putting all of my effort in up front, I would draft my notes and make sure that I had the documents outlined enough where they showed effort that I put some thought into it. But I did not make them, pretty and organized and do all the things that made it up, the final presentation. And so instead, I was able to give them the draft, let them give me the feedback before it was perfected, right? And that saved a lot of time. So my effort was a lot less because I still was able to get the thing done, but not spend all of my time doing it. James mentions tax returns. Yes. So fire safety inspections, right? So other admin types of things that are required, right? We want to make sure we meet those criteria and at the same time not put too much effort in. Yes, Carla, same thing, right? Set aside for the new content, leave time to revise for sure, right? Instead of trying to put all of my effort in, make it perfect, and then have to redo a bunch of it because it's meant to be a conversation. So where are those places we can do that, right? So that's a great place. Another area, thank you for the examples. Those were great examples, everyone. And so then the other area in the impact, low impact and low effort. So these are things like social media. It doesn't take much effort to look at a picture and put a like, a heart, some type of a reaction. However, doesn't make as much of an impact either, right? There are things that we can do on a regular basis that will eat a lot of time. I don't know if folks have a lot of screen time. I know that it's something that I've worked on for many, many moons, and it's an ongoing epidemic, right? The amount of time folks are spending on their phones on low impact, low effort activities that give them a bit of a boost, but don't really make things much better as they could. And so what are those things that are easy to achieve yet don't have as much impact? We would want to look at those two, because that's another area where we can make huge strides if we really are intentional about how we're spending our time. Does anyone think of other low impact, low effort types of things that could take time? They're easy to achieve, so I don't discount them. I think that part of why social media is such a draw, at least for some folks. I know for me, I don't live next to most of my family members. And so having a chance to see pictures or activities or things is a low impact, but it's a low effort. And it maintains the relationships. So that when I do see them in person, I do have something to talk about. So it doesn't mean I'm going to eliminate it, but I won't be spending hours on my phone trying to keep up with everybody. I will use it strategically. So that's another area to think about, is where are we spending our time, and what impact is it having? We can reevaluate, are those places where I want to spend my time? Then we have high impact items. So high impact, low effort are things that we consider quick wins. One of my favorite examples of that is if I end up in an email chain that is more than 3 or 4 responses, I will pick up the phone or set up a meeting for us all to get together to talk about it, because something is lost in translation on a message. And we could spend, I've had folks spend days writing emails back and forth, and it gets more heated, copy and reply all. I don't know if you guys have had that experience where you've had email messages that go on for far too long, or chats in any of the Slack teams, etc., where you're like, oh, we are not making progress here. Let's get together. Let's figure this out. And often a conversation could be a quick win to get folks to understand what they're saying or what's happening. And it can have a big impact, because now instead of us swirling in this email chain, we're moving our project forward. We're moving our initiative forward. We're having that conversation. I've also had times where, see, there's a laugh there. I've also had that happen in text with relationships where it's like, wait a minute, we're not gelling. What happened? Let's talk. So sometimes we lose things in the things that make things quicker, whether it's chatting or texting or other forms of connection, and picking up the phone and having that conversation can make all the difference. So that's something that could be high impact, but it's low effort. I have often been surprised at how big a difference a quick 15-minute conversation can have in my relationships with folks, where you think that it should take longer and it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to. But just even putting that, even the low effort in of doing that is a big deal. And then we have high impact, high effort. These are the strategic projects. When we talk about those 2 to 3 projects you want to have on your list, this is the area. High impact, high effort. Often it takes a lot more attention and effort to make them happen. And the impacts are going to be huge. And they're usually not immediate impacts. And it's harder for us to see them, to have the vision, to understand how they're important. You'll see this with health, like a lot of health types of projects and initiatives. You'll see that with strategic initiatives in your workplace. I know now folks are mentioning IT projects or technical projects and technical programs. They will have usually a very high impact, but it takes effort to put them into place. And so thinking about what are those areas of attention that we would like to have, those are the 2 to 3. And again, if I list out all of the things that are important to me on my list, I will have more. I will have more than enough in each of these. And that's where this quote is. There will always be more good ideas than there's capacity to execute right now. We can do everything. I truly believe we can do everything. We just can't do everything all at once. And the way to be a leader in change is to prioritize, is to make sure that what we're doing is something that creates a sustainable solution that folks adopt and embrace to the best of their ability. They're not always going to embrace it excited. Most people don't like change, right? However, that they can embrace it enough for it to be sustainable. And once we've done that, it becomes part of our whirlwind. And so really being very conscious about the decisions we are making, where our attention lies and where our focus is, and what are we getting in terms of impact of that. And sometimes that means shifting. Sometimes that means taking that look at things and, you know what, I thought this was going to be a high impact project, but it is becoming way more effort than I thought. And maybe we need to reprioritize for a time when it will have more of an impact and be less effort, or when that effort makes sense for the impact involved. For folks in like the project management space, 70% of our projects never come to completion. And a good portion of them should not come to completion. If we've done our work well, when we understand the return on investment, we understand the goals that we have, some projects are meant to fail. Some projects should be stopped. And often we get so wrapped up in the fact that we thought it was important and we thought it was good that we lose sight of the fact that it's supposed to have a certain impact. And so how do we make sure that we do that? We keep checking in. And so I would recommend, right, thinking about where are we spending our time? Where do these fit? And with my teams, I've also had, like, we do a quarterly review. Where do these fit? Do they still meet those criteria? Do they still have the impacts or the effort that we thought? How many did we complete and get off of our plate? Where are we in this work? Because then we can really see progress. Because often folks forget where we came from and only see where we need to go. And we live in this gap of where we want to be and where we are, instead of living in the gain of that growth. If anyone has an interest in that kind of methodology, there's a book called The Gap and the Gain that I highly recommend as a leader in thinking about how are we communicating our work, how are we communicating and creating momentum and morale for maintaining, especially those high impact, high effort projects that don't happen overnight. How do we maintain that enthusiasm? Is focusing in on the gains and focusing in on the momentum that we're building. And so with that, I again want to focus in the high impact areas. So how do we minimize the low impacts? They don't go away. The low impact areas are often part of our whirlwind. They are the whirlwind. They are the whirlwind. And so what we want to do is focus our attention on those 2 to 3 big projects, on those high impact items, and spend and acknowledge that we can't get rid of the whirlwind. So what happens when you do that? Like, what are some of the things? Has anyone had experience of doing that? Does anyone have any thoughts about how this approach can be helpful? You can write them in the chat. I see some folks are typing. Awesome. Cool. So as we identify what those key initiatives are, now we have to get into, okay, how do I actually lead the change, right? Part of leadership is prioritization. Part of the leadership is holding the vision, holding that future of what we could create. And that is a huge part of leadership. We forget sometimes that that's part of our job, is that hold that vision, understand why it's important, remind people on a regular basis about why it's important. So use learnings from other projects and similar to value the risk of the current project. Great. So that's also part of that thinking through, does this make sense and where does it fit in this prioritization? Great. Thank you for that, Carla. So how do we actually lead this change? How do we have the ability to diagnose the reactions? This is one of my favorite models for creating change. It's called Managing Complex Change. And with this, it is a nice matrix. And let's talk through what the components are and how we make change. So you'll see that there are 5 categories across the row: vision, skills, incentives, resources, and an action plan. If all 5 exist, we have change. If any one is missing, we get something else. We get something else that is not the change we want. And this is a great way to not only diagnose, but be proactive in our work as change agents and leaders, and also to be kinder to ourselves and others. And let's talk about why. So the first piece is, what are these elements? Well, the vision is, what is it we're doing here? Like, what is the project? What is the initiative? What is it's at this is where those 2 to 3 goals. I would take this and list out what each of these items are in order to make it happen. And we have lots of other tools. We've got change management, project management tools and templates and Gantt charts and all the things. All of them feed into this. But if we don't have again, as leaders, we don't get to think just as managers checking boxes, making sure things happen. As leaders, our job is to hold the vision and see that we are on track with where we're going in the direction of that vision. And so that first step there, that vision, is so important. If we don't have vision, folks are going to be confused. You see that first row there where vision is missing? We get confusion. And you'll see this happen over and over and over again. Does anyone have any examples? Feel free to write in the chat of any of these items missing and how that exposes a gap that we need to close in order to really get some more progress in our work. So if the vision isn't clear, and that vision is so, it takes time often to be really clear about that vision. So what does it look like? What does it feel like? What are the metrics that drive that? What do the metrics look like when you're in that new space? How do our days, our daily activities change? If we're working on a technical project, what does that shift in the day-to-day of the people who are working in that role or those roles or interacting with that process? What does that look like? And it doesn't mean we have to have a perfect vision. However, we do need to make sure that we have a vision at all, and that we refine the vision as we gain more information. It's very important, because if we don't have a vision, we don't have any direction at all. And when folks are confused, they make things up. They will fill in the gap. People don't like to stay confused. I don't know if you've ever experienced that yourself, is that we fill in the gaps. So if we're not clear about the vision of an initiative, a business idea, a venture, a relationship, we lose track and we will make stuff up. We'll make stuff up. And that doesn't help anyone. So getting super clear about the vision. What is it we're looking for? What does success look like? Yes, and that's saying we need to communicate that vision regularly at all levels. And as leaders, often we are a broken record, which is an old reference. You don't have that as much anymore with digital media, but you do have glitching. So it's similar to the broken record idea, where you get caught up and you might repeat or get stuck. Old records used to have grooves in them, and if there was a scratch, it would not skip the scratch. So you're just stuck in this loop forever. And that's what often it feels like as a leader. Is like, I know I've said this over and over and over again, but I will tell you, if anyone works in marketing, you know it takes 11 to 18 times to hear something for it to be heard the first time, for folks to remember they heard it. And this is what we have to do as communicators and as leaders, is be super clear about that vision, say it often enough that we're sick of hearing it so that folks can start hearing it, and that we can refine that ability to communicate it often, because folks have other things going on in their whirlwinds. This is not their only initiative. And often their initiative, they may have other initiatives that are their priority over yours, but you need help from them. You need support from them. We need to be really clear about how we get help and why this vision that we have is more or as important or important enough for them to give time. What does that look like? Why is it important to them? Let them articulate why it's important to them, but make sure that that is communicated. And as Annette mentioned in the chat, that it's regularly communicated. Every time you talk about it, meeting management is something that's a thing that's really important to me, and that we always start with, why are we here? What is this we're working on? And then we get into the details. And if we don't remember why we're here, we don't remember why it's important, it's so easy to get caught up in the details and use that as an excuse not to move. And if we understand that vision and why it's so much more important and keep that top of mind, then we can actually get through things a little bit easier. We have more incentive to make things work if we're super clear about the vision. And if we have confusion, that becomes insidious and toxic to the work that we're trying to do, and people get disengaged. And that's not what we want. We want to keep people engaged and why it's important. And if we need to shift priorities, we do. We do. But if it's identified as something that is important enough for us to attach resources, time, focus, attention, then we need to make sure that that's communicated very clearly on a regular basis. Next one is skills. So skills are the abilities that we have to be able to do the work in the new environment. So we hold the vision, and often we have this vision of what it is, and then the way we are today does not support that vision. Things have to change. Things need to be adapted in order to meet this new expectation. When I've worked with city governments, often we've had transitions to new IT systems, but folks were used to paper, or they were used to the old system that had certain windows and certain methodologies that they understood, but they didn't have the skills to work in this new environment. The folks that they were working with didn't have the skills. They didn't know how to do it. And if we don't have skills, we create anxiety. So if you have a reaction to your work that is anxious, nervous, unsettled, then we may want to look at skills. If we look at skills, it's a different approach. Okay, so where is the gap in skills? Is the gap in skills that we need to train someone in the way to do it? They totally have the capability of doing this, and we can train them or provide resources or tools, right? Like, what are the ways that we can get them to up level their skills, or even shift their perspective about the skills they already have to be able to do this? I know as my children were growing up, I often would relate their anxiety to something that they didn't realize they had already done. So, for example, if they were trying a new task or they were in a subject that was challenging for them in school, I would relate it to my son's video games. And he was never, I don't know if you guys play video games or have experience with games, that often the first time you play, you're not great at it. Like, you're learning all of the modes, you're learning the storyline, you're understanding where the buttons are and which one does what. No one just jumps in as great at the first time they're playing anything or doing anything. And so you don't have the skills yet. Yet we have past experiences of how we learned, how we grew our skills. And that's what I would do with my children as they were growing up, is point them back to, hey, I get that this is new for you and you have this nervousness about it. And look at this entire body of evidence of how you have the ability to adapt and grow and learn. And we can do it again. You can do it again. And that may be part of the conversation to have with your teams, your staff, yourself, about that anxiety. If anxiety comes in, what skills do we need? What do we need to nourish and grow and maybe even adapt in skills that we already have to be able to handle this new environment that we're creating based on the vision that we have? Next is incentives. And incentives does not mean money all the time. Sometimes it's money. I'm not going to lie. That's a great incentive for many, many folks. And it is not the only incentive, right? What are some of the incentives that folks have for doing this? Is it a better work-life balance? Is it a more efficient process? What is the incentive for what level of the organization? I know Annette mentioned, like, the vision needs to be at all levels. The incentives need to be at all levels. Worked on initiatives and projects that when we implemented them, it meant people were going to be out of work. What incentive did they have to help us? Absolutely none. If anything, it created more of an opportunity for resistance, which is the what comes up when we don't have incentives. How do we make sure that folks understand what's in it for them? We have that saying, what's in it for me, the WIFM acronym. What's in it for them? Why is it better for them to do this than not? What is the motivation that they have, that incentive, to make it happen? How is that helpful? And how do we make it real for them, right? And understanding that when resistance shows up, we need to do a better job of communicating the incentives and the motivation that we want to have. Like, what does that look like for them? And sometimes it is someone's going to be out of a job and they're building skills for their next job, or that they're going to have an opportunity to do something in a different environment or a different department. What is it that we are creating here as an incentive? Why is this so much better for our clients, our customers, ourselves, our lives, our health? Because it's very easy to just think short-sighted, what's right in front of my nose versus a bigger picture. There are lots of studies that talk about seatbelts, for example, right? Like there's a lot of resistance folks had to putting seatbelts on because they're uncomfortable. They're not, it doesn't feel good. But what's the incentive to do that? Well, the incentive is you can actually save your life or the life of someone you love because they had their seatbelt on in case of an accident. But that's not like right away, right? What's the incentive? And sometimes folks put in negative incentives. Here in the States, we have lots of seatbelt laws, and people will pay money and fines if they don't have seatbelts on. So that's another way that they've created an incentive to do something short term that has a much more strategic value, because it doesn't happen every time. Thank goodness, knock on wood, we don't get into accidents every time we get into a car. And it's really important to have seatbelts. So what is the incentive for folks? How do we make sure that they have an awareness of that incentive so that they can actually continue to work through that resistance that comes up? Another way I like to think about resistance as well is like the canary in the coal mine, right? It's a good signal that we're missing something and that we need to close that gap in order to really move ourselves forward. And if there isn't a clear incentive about what's in it for each participant in the project, each key stakeholder, then we need to maybe reevaluate why we're doing this. Open to thoughts and questions as you think about them in the chat. Next is resources. If we don't have the right resources, it creates frustration, right? And resources could be time, money, effort, tools that we need in order to be able to successfully implement this change. And if we don't have that, we get lots of frustration, because if folks have the vision of what we want to create, they have the skills, they have incentives, they know why we're doing this, we have an action plan, so we know what to do. But if we don't have the resources to get it done, it creates a lot of frustration and pushback that we get from folks, because if they don't have time and attention to put towards things, it's not going to happen. It's just not. And so what resources do we need to set aside? Do we need to make sure that we have allocated to making sure that everything else comes together? So if folks are frustrated, I would check in. What resources are missing? And then lastly, action plan. What are the steps we're going to take? Those of you who are project managers and deliverers of systems, you know how important an action plan is. And if we don't have an action plan, if we don't have a clear step-by-step way of getting to where we want to be, we have false starts. We have, again, people are guessing. People are guessing about what's next to do, when to do it, how to get it done. And so if we don't have those pieces, we can be in a lot of trouble. Would love your thoughts and reflections on this model. It blew me away. I love this model. I use it all the time. And it is not perfect. A friend of mine likes to say all models are wrong. Some are more wrong than others. So I love this model, but it is not the only way to address things. It is not going to be comprehensive and complete in all scenarios. However, it is a great place to start. Right? Using these models, any of the models that I'm sharing, any of the models you use on a regular basis. This is why people keep coming up with new models, because they're never going to be complete and perfect. Yet, having a model gives you a chance to step away, detach from the initial reaction emotionally, and give yourself a chance to be leader. Okay. Yeah, thank you. And for those chatting. So what does it take to be a leader? What does it take to be mindful of the human side of change? Is to acknowledge that feelings and reactions and frustrations will come up. They will always come up. We are human beings. We are creatures of habit, and we don't like to be thrown off our game and what's comfortable. Some of us initiate that, and we still have the emotions. These tools will help us make sure that we don't fall into the pitfall of seeing someone's confusion as an attack, someone's resistance as their lack of engagement. No, it is a normal response to a gap. It's a normal response and a reasonable response. And we take that seriously. And if we are actually taking that person's perspective in seriously, it is amazing the adoption rates that you can get. I used to have an employee who was just a curmudgeon. He could not say a more positive thing about anything. And he was my greatest ally because he spoke up. I loved it when he said something because I knew that he was going to be the one to point out the confusion, the anxiety, the resistance, the frustration. Like I knew there was going to be a person who was going to tell me the real story instead of saying, oh yeah, this is going to be great. And then they, move on and they do whatever they want anyway. And so I appreciate those folks, the folks who will speak up, the folks who will tell me things are wrong or they don't feel right, because that gives me a chance to go back and look at what we're missing. And so the question, what happens when more than one is missing? Yes, you can also have a situation where folks are anxious and confused. Absolutely. So anxious and confused could be vision and skills, right? So I would look back to the model, James, and ask, like, where does this fit? What are some of the things that I'm missing? And identifying the feeling helps us get started, right? And sometimes we can be confused. I might see resistance as anxiety. I might see frustration as confusion. And so, again, this model is not meant to be perfect. It is meant to be a starting point. And so maybe I misinterpret resistance and it's actually frustration. So ask more questions. Get into this model. I've actually shared this model with folks and say, okay, what do you feel like? Do you feel like we have a clear vision? What is it that would help you feel more comfortable with this change? And then we can talk about what is missing. What is it that we need to fill in the gaps on and what would be helpful? And then try it out and then see if it changes. And if it doesn't change, what else is missing? It is meant to be like a conversation starter, right? And what do we want to do to try a solution? Again, with human nature, there are some things that are pretty consistent, right? We do need to eat. We do need to sleep. Those are some basic things, functions that we have, right? Like we need those things. And the rest is kind of interpretation. And we're not going to always be perfect in identifying and solving each one. And if we're willing to try together, we get more buy-in. We have folks who see us as human beings, we see them as human beings, and we're willing to work together toward a common goal and a solution that is adopted. So yeah, thanks, James, for the question, right? We could definitely have situations. And as mentioned earlier, we could have situations where someone is confused while someone else is frustrated and someone else is anxious. And all depending on where they are in the process, where they are in their skill set, where they are in the amount of change they're being affected by, and how they process that for themselves. I would also invite you to consider how you are feeling about some changes and where do you need that clarity, because it all starts with the leader. If as a leader I don't have these set, I'm not going to effectively create change. So what do I need to build? And then how do I continue to refine that based on the feedback I'm getting from folks in the different levels of this? So this is a model that folks tend to really appreciate. And again, I'm not going to say that it is perfect. However, I am going to say that it does change the game. It changes the way we operate. It changes the way we react and respond to folks, because often folks will take questions as questioning me, questioning my ability to lead, or questioning my ability to set a vision. And it is not that at all. It is their own response and their gaps that are showing up. It's a reflection of their own feelings of things. And so when I can take time and pause and check in and understand where to go then we have a different conversation and change is really possible. So if you think about action steps as a leader, like what do you notice about when you're thinking about responses to change? What do you notice? Like, do you see a lot of resistance? Do you see a lot of frustration, confusion? And then what's missing? And how can you use these to help you move forward? And I recommend, again, these tools and frameworks are here for a reason. I love frameworks, and also don't want to use them as a be all end all, right? They are not 100% infallible. There are gaps, there are situations where we are missing something. So instead of guessing and just assuming was something that came up earlier too, right? I'm not going to assume that I know anything about this person's reaction to this particular situation. However, I have tools and frameworks that will give me guides on questions to ask. And I want to be curious. Because sometimes I think it's one thing and it's completely different. So often I don't start with, here's the solution. Oh, you're confused. Okay, we're going to just focus on the vision. And I'm just going to repeat to you the vision. No, I'm going to be curious about their reaction first. Oh, so is it that you're frustrated, or what is the feeling that's happening here? What is really going on? Because when I can get to some more of that root cause and more of an understanding, that person feels seen, feels heard, feels valued as a member of my community, of my team, of my ecosystem. Again, this could be personal or professional. It could be personal and professional. If we're working with partners, I've had that example as well. And so what is it that is actually going on? Be curious about that. And when we dig into that part, then we have the ability to start using our tools. And again, I have shared the grid. Like, I don't just tell them I'm using a framework, or I don't use my own frameworks. In many cases, I say, hey guys, we're going to use this. This is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to approach it. And I would love your thoughts. And so sometimes it shifts, because now instead of them needing me to be curious and figure it out, they figure it out for themselves and say, hey, based on this, I think I would be more comfortable if we did this. I am not clear on the vision. I would like some more clarity on the vision. Here are my questions. Then it becomes this whole thing where we're all fully engaged in creating the change together, which is also part of leadership, right? Leadership is about empowering others to step into their greatness, to step into their leadership and strategic knowledge and ability. How do we do that as folks in our roles for each other? And it's a great framework that can be very helpful. So I invite you to consider, like, what is your takeaway here? Like, what actions would you like to practice? What are you taking away as an incentive for you to make changes in the way you operate with change? And any other thoughts, questions, because we will have time for questions in a few more minutes. So please feel free to ask, to share. What's an action you'll put into place and practice based on our discussion? I see folks are typing, so I'll give them a few seconds to type. So as you think about this, it's great to come to webinars. I love that so many of you are taking time to come in, check in, and if nothing changes, nothing changes. And so how do we get into a framework of allowing ourselves to shift and adjust so that we can make sure that things actually change in the direction we want? Where does that fit in? Yes, so Carla, using that last model to build a business case of a project, to allow for that. Yes, awesome. That's great. Like this, I've used this as a model. And often we can use project management frameworks for charters, etc. This can also help feed a charter as well. Yes. Preparing effectively for change. This is Sarah, right? Identify what's missing about how people react. And skills. Okay, so thinking about skills is an area, right? Again, it's a way to start thinking through that framework of where we need to address things. Awesome. And then James, so being more realistic about the number of goals to pursue. Oof, that's a big one. I love that you're addressing that, James. Often we think we have more capacity than what we are actually capable of. I have ADHD, and so I always think I can do so much more in the time that's there, because I have this time blindness thing, and I just have a really awful sense of how long things take. And so, I will often overwhelm myself. And so having those frameworks and that like knowledge base of, okay, this is how we tend to operate. And that if I finish those 2 to 3 goals sooner, great. And I may not. So really giving ourselves some grace. Absolutely. Absolutely. Love that. So really thinking about, how do we integrate this? How do we make this time, right? All of our time is so valuable, right? And I appreciate everyone spending time on this and giving yourselves the gift of time and attention. And how do you make this powerful? What will shift for you in moving this forward? That's exactly what we want to do, is make that leap into our leadership for our own lives, as well as our careers and relationships. Yeah. Awesome. Excellent. So I'm going to shift to Sejan to talk a little bit more, and then we'll have some time for questions if any more come up.
Yep. Perfect, Luz. That was excellent, and I'm glad that the chat is actually active. These are our courses. I'm going to give a few moments while people have a look. I'm going to write my email, so if you have any questions or if you are interested in any of our courses, please email me. I will be more than happy to guide you. This is a reminder that the webinar is recorded and you will receive the presentation slides and the recording most probably next week. And can we go on to the next slide, please?
Absolutely.
And these are our contact information for both Knowledge Train and Agile KLC. I'm just going to quickly pop a survey just while people, if anyone has any questions, you can always write them in the chat. So we have a question. Thank you for the model, etc. My request is, could you please give some recommendations on good books about change?
Yes. Yes. So I will think a little bit more. I think that there's one, it's a tiny little book called Who Moved My Cheese that I thought was such a great intro to the process that we use of navigating change. It is something that is super important and powerful. The other recommendation that I made earlier was The Gap and the Gain. That's one that I found to be super helpful in navigating change for myself, and keeping myself focused in on the initiatives that I have, what's important to me, and how I focus on what I want to create in my life. So The Gap and the Gain is one that I've read multiple times in creating a framework for my own way of just being kinder to myself and acknowledging the growth without getting too caught up in what's missing. So those are really, really helpful ways of addressing change. So those are two definite recommendations. I'll have to think if there are more, and I can definitely share those with Subjan to share with folks as well. But those are the two definite top of mind books that I would recommend. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Does anyone have any more questions? Just wait for a few minutes, just in case.
And thanks for the response to the survey. Please continue to respond to the survey as well.
Does anyone have any more questions? So feel for typing.
Yeah. Another change book that I would recommend is The Big Leap. Most of my change books are not about like how to make change happen. They're more about the mindset of how to navigate and personally address change. So The Big Leap is another one, because often we sabotage ourselves in making transitions that we want to make for lots of reasons. And I think the Managing Complex Change highlights elements of those where we actually self-sabotage our own ability to make change happen. Yeah. Thanks, Joseph.
Thank you, Joseph. And the
Yes, by Gay Hendrick. Yes, exactly. The Big Leap. Yep. Yep. Those are great books. Yeah, many of them are in that the self-improvement and other modalities around like how do you shift. Getting to Yes is another one, and that is it's a negotiation book. And also often what we're doing when we're navigating change is a negotiation. Yeah. And so making sure that we really understand like why are we here, what is the incentive that we have. So that's a big thing, is Getting to Yes by William Ury is another one that I would recommend. So yeah, those are some of the big ones that have come to mind, and I've read them multiple times. So that's another thing too, is right, allowing yourself the time to process, internalize, practice, and then review those methodologies and approaches is also really powerful to creating sustainable change in ourselves. And if folks have other books that they have found valuable, I would love to hear those as well.